Hello, and welcome to another interesting session on our special launch series of the Perspective program. Today we're going to be talking about a very topical issue, an issue that is globally exciting, globally controversial, and I've got an expert joining me today to discuss this as usual. My name is Adedoyin, and we're going to be talking about payments. You will agree with me that payments, especially electronic payments, is today the lifeblood of any economy. E-payments in particular hold an undeniable lure for the public at large, for governments, for nations, for institutions. Many who understand it know that it has wide-ranging impact on a number of issues. It could enhance efficiency if implemented properly. It could stem corruption. It could improve the velocity of money in the system. There's so many perceived benefits, and some of them are indeed real. We could indeed find ourselves in a completely cashless society, more secure. We could find ourselves in a situation where we're accelerating the whole globalization trend, and we're really in the center of it. The whole promise of e-inclusion, financial inclusion, lies within payments. So to discuss this issue with me today, I've got a very seasoned IT and business professional with over 25 years of experience at very senior levels, executive management levels. He's been a CIO, a CTO, a CEO. He's managed businesses across continents, and he brings to bear a great perspective on IT, on business, and today, particularly on payments. Join me to welcome our guest, Tunde Coker. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you for finding time out of your busy schedule to join us. So I'm going to start with an interesting question, even as I mentioned that Tunde is currently the regional head for the emerging payment systems.
Emerging market payments.
Emerging market payments, EMV, emerging market payments for West Africa. Tunde, what is your view of the e-payments landscape? What picture do you see across Africa today?
Across Africa, EMP is quite well placed to get, across Africa. We operate in about 40 countries, 130 banks are customers of ours across Africa. And my area of accountability is in West Africa. However, it's emerging with respect to levels of sophistication in the payment space. Clearly what's been happening in Nigeria with driven initially by cashless Lagos, a significant increase in financial transactions electronically enabled Ghana. There's the M-Pesa phenomenon in East Africa. That's quite unique because you also have the underlying payments environment, which is enabled by card transactions and so on. Clearly, South Africa is in many aspects ahead. So you have quite a diverse picture across Africa in terms of levels of maturity, in which areas of maturity you have. I say East Africa, especially Kenya, you've got the mobile payments, which is particularly distinct, but that didn't really take hold in other countries around there that have tried it. Here we're starting to see in Nigeria the mobile payments capability increasing, phenomenally increasing the number of transactions that are electronically enabled. When I say that, it's either through the use of a card as a payment platform, or transactions that are electronically enabled through the web, for instance, or through mobile payments. Clearly that's still developing. In West Africa, you can actually sort of simplify the West African environment, you've got Nigeria as a significant country. It's about half the GDP, the entire GDP, purchasing power parity of the whole of West Africa. There's Ghana that has its own sort of payment system as well. Of course, this is part of ECOWAS. Then you have what I'd call the rest of the Anglophone, so Africa countries like Sierra Leone, Liberia, Gambia. That's part of the WAMSI, West Africa Monetary Zone, which includes Nigeria and Ghana actually. Sort of headquartered out of Abuja, it's with ECOWAS. There's also the West Africa Monetary Integration WAMI initiative going on there. Then you have the Francophone countries hooked in, sort of located out of Senegal, based around the UEMOA monetary area with the CFA franc. And you have different levels of sophistication with respect to core infrastructure that enables payments. Of course, we have our switches in Nigeria and Ghana. Other countries, like I said, with UEMOA, depend on the GIM switch out of Senegal. But in country, you have different levels of uptake of electronic payments. Some countries are very much in the infancy. Liberia, Sierra Leone, although in banks, especially ones that are part of the international banks, some of them are Nigerian, GTB, multi-country presence, UBA, Access Bank. They actually have banks in these countries that would offer cards, payment cards, credit cards, and so on. Some of the local banks, in some of those countries don't yet have the sophistication, but certainly the desire to take up payments. But there's, across the board, a significant opportunity to take cash out of the system. Too much cash in the system in a lot of countries. Electronic payments are a route to financial inclusion, and the central banks in those countries see that as
huge benefit.
A huge benefit. I think the impact on GDP growth of having an electronic payments ecosystem is significant, and we're starting to see that here in Nigeria and Ghana. In West Africa, they're the most sophisticated in the sort of English-speaking area. And of course, I've talked about the UEMOA area, Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire.
I mean, you painted a very interesting picture where you've been able to isolate for us, according to the region, the adoption of payment channels. And it seems as if in different regions, there are different channels that have been adopted at different rates. Overall, would you say there are key factors that are driving this adoption? And what factors are the most prominent?
Yes. Some factors that are driving adoption are around underlying infrastructure, underlying capability. So with respect to companies like us being able to work with banks in those countries to provide processing capability, the ability to operate with some of the global schemes, Visa, MasterCard, to enable electronic payments and more financial inclusion that way. You've got the underlying infrastructure, for instance, that will enable ATMs to interoperate. Where you don't have that, banks have ATMs that are actually linked just to the bank. Having the underlying infrastructure enables you to do that. Point of sale systems, enabling you to have the infrastructure to support point of sale systems, the network connectivity, for instance. But what you're finding is that the mobile phone proliferation around Africa is quite a liberating thing for Africa, because that provides wireless infrastructure that allows Africa in some instances actually to start to look at how to leapfrog other more established economies. I mean, the central bank will say that in Nigeria that's something we intend to do, to leapfrog. Use the technology capabilities to leapfrog. So those are kind of the enablers that you have to have in place. There's also the regulatory aspect. You've got to create the regulatory environment that encourages the use of electronic payments. Otherwise, you'll continue. People say cash is king. but cash doesn't have to be physical cash. And people have to be weaned off their feel that you only have money if you have cash in your pocket. So that takes time. So it's not just the technology infrastructure being in place, it's also human nature where you have to have the people feeling comfortable that they can actually trust the system. Therefore, as you know, your company operates a lot in this sort of security space and so on, you have to have trust and reduction of fraud and so on. So when you get that, you then get people, communities, and so on more liable to want to use electronic payments.
Interesting. So we've talked about the infrastructure, the channels, and then you've touched on the very interesting bit, which is the people and the change enablement that needs to happen. For emerging market payments, what role specifically do you play in this terrain in enabling the whole payment ecosystem to function more effectively, to achieve some of the objectives that you had, outlined for governments and for organizations?
Yeah, so one of our sort of submission goals is to enable and empower the communities we serve across Africa and the Middle East. Therefore, we work very closely with all of the stakeholders in what I would call the payments ecosystem in any country. The regulators, we work in partnership with the regulators to understand, but also in a positive way influence the creating the right regulatory environment for a payments ecosystem. We work with other stakeholders and our customers, the banks. Our primary customers are the banks, with respect to not just being a supplier to them, but to be a partner with them in figuring out the right strategies to adopt, given the environment that they operate in, given the maturity of the environment, and so on. But also, we're able to bring across borders sophisticated world-class infrastructure that could allow a country that's actually not that sophisticated leverage our infrastructure to enable their banks to operate and offer electronic payments services for card payments and integration with mobile payments and so on. So we do that within the context of the fact that we are a payments processor, and we enable banks with third-party processor to banks, to enable banks to use our platform to efficiently provide payment services to their customers.
So for EMV, the whole payments acceleration goal is one that you obviously would benefit you and would benefit the African nations, as you've said. What specific game changers do you see? What one or two things do you think, if those things happened, will just change the face of payments across Africa? I mean, in Nigeria, we've seen the government pushing very heavily, and that has helped. And as you alluded also, we've seen reported jumps on e-payments transactions of 40-50%. What is going to take it to 100%? In Nigeria and in other African countries, will it ever go to 100%? What are the game changers?
Well, will it ever go to 100%? You usually find, if you look at Europe, that's quite a few years. Some of the events there takes sort of quite a few years. We lag by quite a few years. It probably won't be 100%, but the key thing is to increase the level of financial inclusion. That is key. And financial awareness in the population. If you look at the Nigerian population, for instance, there are around about 90 to 95 million people of the age of around about 16 to 65. So that's your population of financial inclusion, so to say. You won't get 100%. Even in established, much more mature electronic communities, countries, they don't have 100%. However, the key thing is to get to a critical mass within that population to enable financial inclusion and so on. And what's been done by NIMSI is an example. That's the National ID Management Commission in Nigeria, that has the significant potential and likelihood, in my view, to transform the payment ecosystem and financial inclusion. in Nigeria for that key age range.
Okay, so if we were to see a replication of that in other African countries where the identity commissions or other such large-scale national institutions were to hook on to the e-payments, the e-payments terrain, probably by issuing cards or by connecting with the mobile phone systems, then we would see tremendous growth, you think?
I think so, yes. But also to have some fundamental core infrastructure that allows interoperability within the economy.
Yes.
Yeah, it might be having a national switch isn't the one solution. It's just part of a whole set of things you have to have in place to create the environment, that enables financial inclusion and also enables you to have an electronic payments ecosystem. But then in other environments like Kenya has shown that, there are other means, not necessarily through banking itself,
yes,
for enabling electronic payments. But that also has its own side. It's also telco-led. Over here in Nigeria, it's not telco-led. Exactly. It allows the central bank much better insight and control into the different money, cash indicators in the economy, M0 and so on, to understand just how much money is in electronic or otherwise that's actually flowing through the economy.
Okay, what are the inhibitors? What are the key inhibitors? What is it that's limiting that growth? What is it that could indeed put an end to the growth pattern that we've seen? What do you see?
Inhibitors, there's a hell of a lot of education that has to be done with people. With a lot of change, you've got to take into account aspects of culture. You've got to take into account aspects of the hopes and fears of people, trust. That's very important. And of course, we've talked about infrastructure. That is important. And a lot of that is actually enabling the broad range of types of connectivity you might have. But of course, creating the right regulatory environment. You see, that kind of environment, as you know, these things can drive behavior.
Absolutely.
And it's putting in place the right frameworks that drive the right
kind of behavior
that enable you to achieve much more financial inclusion and also an effective electronic payments environment.
Okay, my final question is, we want you to give us a crystal ball perspective. Look into the future and tell us what you see the e-payments landscape in Africa 5-10 years from now.
Yes. Well, there's some amazing things happening. I mean, it's with respect to, payments using payments card, disbursement of payments, and so on. We're finding that if you look at the sort of transaction dynamics, people would say go to an ATM and take out a significant amount of money to last the weekend. Now they're taking smaller amounts, partly because also they don't have to pay for the transaction. That has its own other implications that we could probably sort of debate. But as the infrastructure and the banking systems are more reliable and they trust that they won't be stranded over the weekend, they collect lower levels of cash. But that's sort of a midway, because you say, well, you're actually still taking cash out of the ATM. But you'll always just have the use of cash. I mean, if you go around the world, there's a mix between use of cash and use of other electronic means.
Right.
So it comes down to choice. We currently, EMP, are able to link up with mobile payment platforms that would allow you to transfer money from your mobile wallet onto a prepaid card, as an example, and vice versa, and or from your current account to a prepaid card. And so people also want to be able to use a card internationally.
Yes.
Increasingly, students want to be able to buy their apps on their iPads with internationally acceptable cards. And people will go online to transfer money. And the expectation of having instant payment then becomes real. I mean, it just becomes a way of life, So what I see is that, and this will happen at different paces across the different countries in Africa, and that's where you find the implementing the infrastructure and so on enables different countries to move on at different paces. But if you look at the future, it's a matter of choice. People will have choice with respect to what mode of payments they use. They will have cash, but will choose to use a card. They'll choose to use a debit card in certain instances, and we found also in certain instances people would want to use a prepaid card, and that's gaining a lot more popularity, or choose to use a credit card depending on the mode of use that they see. We'll go to the ATM to collect cash, or actually you even use the ATM to swap cash from a mobile wallet, or do a person-to-person or person-to-government transaction, or government to people or communities. And you're starting to find that with some mobile payment companies, they're starting to focus on either mass corporate or mass retail or government type solutions. So you find people exposed to significant amounts of choice depending on the situation at that point in time, or the level of security they want, or the ease of transmission of money. And people will expect to have access to these choices as they want and as they choose. The example I can use here is also with banking. I used to be a senior person at Egg Bank, which was a totally electronic bank, a pioneering bank in the UK. But you still have bank branches. So because people want choice, they want to be able to dance across channels. Okay. On the one hand, call a contact center, on the other hand, go to a branch, and so at times use the mobile phone, or at times use the internet, banking facility of the bank, depending on what they're trying to achieve. And it's the banks that are able to provide that choice that actually you see effectively, efficiently thrive. It's the same thing as payments. People will be able to, for want of a better term, dance across payment types and channels for executing what they want to do in the mode they want to do it in, and will want the flexibility to have their own cash in whatever wallet or account they choose to have it, be it a current account, be it a savings account, be it a mobile wallet, or be it a prepaid a card wallet, or and I expect the goal is realized with the national ID card on the national ID wallet.
Wow. So this future is one of financially aware, digitally aware community of active participants in the economy. I think that's the key thing when you emphasize choice. To be able to make informed decisions, you've got to have the information, and you've got to be aware of these channels and be able to use them. And that is a challenging picture that you painted. A lot of things need to happen, but it's a possible picture also, I'd say. I'd like to, at this point, end the program. I'd like to thank you for joining us. Our guest today has been Tunde Coker, a seasoned IT and business professional. Tunde has given us deep insight into the e-payments landscape across Africa. He's been able to give us a perspective on the various channel preferences in various African regions. He's been able to explain to us the importance of the key driving factors and the role that the emerging market payments organization plays in all of this. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to chatting with you again. Bye-bye.